We are live. We are live, everybody. What is up? What is up? Austin prechtelevate Performance, coming at you live on today's episode of the Fit Parent Project. And today I am joined by a guest of mine who has been a guest of mine on this podcast many a times. She is also a coach for prechtelevate Performance. Absolute badass, mom of three, like kick that ass, taking names on all fronts. And if you guys haven't listened to any of our other previous episodes, highly suggest you check it out. But yeah, it's Erin. Introduce yourself. Say what's up.
Hey, what's up?
Yeah.
I'm here. You know, I think you introduced me pretty well. So
yeah. Today we're going to be talking about, guys, about how Erin's finished up her reverse diet, which we talked a little bit about, and we talked about like how the reverse diet works, and we talked about, I've done a couple of episodes on how to do a reverse diet properly, but we're now finishing up, or have finished up her reverse diet, and we've been done with it for like about a month now, maybe a month and a half. For a while, so
I think it's been a couple months.
Okay, my timelines are all fucked up. So so about
I blinked and it's almost June.
I know, it's crazy, and so we've done, yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
My kid's birthday is tomorrow. Shit. Thank you for the reminder. Yeah. So she, has been done with her reverse diet now for the last couple of months, allegedly. No, I'm just kidding. So she's been done with that for the last couple of months. And we've restarted kind of and kicked off her next phase, her next cutting phase or weight loss phase, or however somebody wants to phrase it. If you're like a bodybuilder like me, you probably call it a cutting phase. And so we've been doing that. And today we just kind of wanted to talk about, like, kind of give you guys an update on that, how that's been going, talk about kind of like where she was around this time a year ago, like, because we've been working together for quite a while now.
Almost a year and a half.
It'll be 2 years in this fall, right? Or
this November. December.
Yeah, beginning of December.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And so this time last year, like, things were quite a bit different because, one, like, we were we hadn't made as much progress as we made so far. We were at like a higher body weight. We, calorie wise, like, body composition wise, a lot has changed since then. And so I think it'll be like beneficial to the listener and to the people that are like watching this live right now, like, just kind of like talk about some of those longer term impacts that, people can have and benefit from. One, just like putting in the freaking work for an extended period of time, like regardless of what the results are. Obviously you've gotten some awesome results, but then also just talking about, like, why the reverse diet went so well and why now we can, eat a hell of a lot more food and still lose weight at a lower, body weight. And so for you, like, having now done a successful reverse diet and very successful reverse diet, and the reason why it was so fucking successful is because she's a machine when it comes to getting her nutrition in. Like, honestly, I don't know. I think, like, out of the entire reverse diet because we did a reverse diet for a pretty long time. Like, it was like 3 or 4. Was it like 3 months, 3.5 months?
I think it was like 4.
Yeah.
Because I think we started like the end of August or something like that.
Yeah.
Last year.
You're right. Yeah, and it was perfect timing too, because like the holidays were coming up, and we just like took it like slow and steady, and we were like, well, like, now's as good a time as ever. Like, who doesn't want to have more food to eat during the holidays, and during winter when it's like harder to get out and about and shit like that. And so, So when just kind of we'll give people a little bit of a background, but like whenever we started your reverse diet, you're like around like 1,600 calories, something like that. And probably
I think it was actually at 18.
Oh shit!
I didn't go below 18, but I was already feeling, because I'm so active.
That's right.
That like I was already feeling the mental fatigue, the body fatigue. I was having a hard time like going, and I'm like, okay, we got to do something. And they're like, okay, well, let's try this. And
we kind of rode. Because for a lot of people, like everybody's gonna find that like bottom of the barrel for themselves. Like there's a physical bottom of the barrel, which, like, it's more of like the the mental like bottom of the barrel when it comes to like having that diet fatigue, which is like a real issue. And like, and you know, that's going to hit differently at different times for you know, different people. But you know, for somebody that's like on point with their nutrition and is just like, and like you said, like super active and just like, you know, just doing, you know, and using that food like quite effectively on a daily basis. Like, you know, 1800 happened to be kind of like that bottom of the barrel for you. And so then we kind of like started that reverse diet. And I think you were about like 160, between 160, 162 when we started that. And then we ended up building up your calorie pool from like the 1800 all the way up. I think we stopped at like 3400, right? Like that's kind of when we,
32, 34, somewhere in there.
Yeah. And over the course of that August until just like
January, February,
yeah, like we had only gained like, that was only like 8 pounds, if that. Like, and you think about that over the course of that entire span of time, while also eating that much more food, like literally like, you know, probably triple the amount of food that you were eating like before we started working together. Like, you know,
easily. Because I want to say, like,
Yep.
I was averaging probably 1,000 calories a day before we started working, which
it's crazy. and so like, you know, it just goes to show like the impact that can be had whenever you run a reverse diet properly, that like now it's like, hey, like, you know, we had to be on point with our nutrition for an extended period of time, but it's pretty freaking sweet that we are like 70 pounds less and can eat, you know, three times more food, which makes it just way more like sustainable, like from a mental perspective, from like also just a physical like hunger perspective. It's just like, I mean, right now, like, you know, with where you're at in your like where you ended at your you know, your reverse diet, like right now, like, I mean, let's see, like I'm probably like 50 pounds heavier than you are right now. And like my calories right now, just because I'm into my cut right now, they're where yours were at 170, just because you had that reverse diet dialed in so effectively, which is the name of the game. Right. And I think like, and I think, you know, if you know, people could be okay with gaining a little bit of weight, like in the process, and could, you know, like get their nutrition dialed into that point for an extended period of time, they could reap the rewards that you're, you know, reaping right now in a lot of ways. And like, so like for you, like right now, like, you know, this time, like around this time of year compared to last year, when, you know, you were, you know, on a cut and you know, kind of, because now we've started your weight loss phase again and things are definitely moving again, which is sweet. And so like for you, like at this like higher amount compared to like last year, like how is it, what's the difference right now for you, like from the mental or physical or like even like just like hunger like stage? Like,
so like overall, I feel more energetic this year than I did last year. I weigh probably about 10, 15 pounds, maybe even 20 pounds less than I did last year about June. I did not look that up, so don't quote me on that. But I know that like we had gone down to like the 1,800 calories, and I remember like really being stressful about all, like it felt kind of stressful. I'm not gonna lie. And now I'm just like, okay, and I'm eating, currently my calories are at 2,500 and I'm losing weight. And I know it's all fat. You know, I'm still
getting leaner,
still got the muscle, you know, you know, exactly. And like I said, more energy. I'm not worried about the scale as much. Like, sure, I love it when it goes down, but you know, at the same time, I'm trying to look at how I feel in my clothes a lot more. Because at this time last year, I could not fit into size 6 jeans. For example. So
that's awesome. I mean, that just kind of goes to show like I feel like a lot of times like people, because when you first start off, like, you know, people want results. Like they want the scale to go down. They want to, you know, stop, you know, or they want to see that big change in the mirror. They want to, you know, they want to have all these things in a very short period of time oftentimes. And it's like, it can be kind of unrealistic. But if they could just see, like, which is kind of why I wanted to talk about this today and have this like bigger picture, like, hey, like if you're listening to this right now, like look at the grand scheme of things. Look, not, yes, like you're going to see some changes like in the next like couple of months doing what you need to do if you have a good plan, but like think longer term, like think like, a year from now, maybe even 2 years from now, like what that could look like if you can just stay consistent. Because like before we talked about like, or before we even like started this episode off and started recording, we were talking about a little bit about how like if somebody just lifted weights for like strength train for a year straight, even if they weren't in a calorie deficit and they just maintained like what they were eating on a daily basis, if they did that, they would see some pretty significant body composition shifts. They would see the scale probably go down. They would lose body fat. Like those things would happen because like in the longer term, like you're building up this lean mass. You're building up that lean body mass, right? You're building that up over time. And that's going to impact it's going to impact your metabolism. That's going to impact how you feel on a daily basis. That's going to impact your strength, your energy levels, like you're confident. Like there's just a lot of like things that like, if somebody could just like see that big greater picture, because it's hard to see that until you've done it and you're like living in it. It's like, it's hard to like visualize yourself in that position, but it exists. Like, and so like, if anybody gets anything out of this, like anything out of this live today, like I want it to be like look towards the bigger picture, like recognize that even if you just do like, and again, nutrition's like 99% of like, weight loss in general. In fact, unless you're supplementing it through cardio or strength training or whatever, like it really is like being in a calorie deficit is the only way you're going to lose weight. But, putting your body in a better position through its body composition, having more like muscle, like that's going to increase your metabolism.
That's what I was thinking too. Like when you have more muscle, your caloric deficit is going to be at a different level than if you're not building any muscle.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Because I mean, for those of you guys that don't know, like it takes more energy to maintain muscle. It just does. Like it takes more energy. It takes, AKA you get to eat more calories the more muscle that you have, even if you're at the same body weight. So like somebody who's like 160, like let's just for example, like 160 and you're, body fat percentage is like 30%. Well, somebody that weighs 160 and their body fat percentage is that's at even like, 25 or 20 or 15, like they're going to be able to eat more food in theory than, if they had a clone of themselves that was 30% body fat, just because like you have more muscle, and that makes an impact over the long term. That really can add up over time, and like having that long term like building effect, I think is really something to think about and something to like remember in those moments, maybe when the scale's not doing what you want it to do, or when you don't feel like going to the gym, or whatever it may be. Just like every time you go to the gym, every time you get your protein, every time, whatever it may be, it's like, yeah, it's doing something for you in the short term, but it's also doing a lot for you in the long term. And
it all adds up. It definitely adds up.
It's that cumulative effect that like, you just keep putting, it's like a health and fitness journey is like a bank. Like it is like the more that you give, the more that you get. You got to make deposits. Like you got to make deposits before you can before you can withdraw. Otherwise you're going to be in the negative and you're going to get your bank card shut down or some shit. Like that's just how it works. And so, I think that, being able to do that. And I think that, that coupled with, a successful reverse diet, like, like in a sense, like, we've got your body in an environment that's like very conducive to like, burning fat. Like you've got more muscle, we've trained your metabolism through, I put air quotes around that, like through, like using metabolic adaptation to our advantage, which, for those of you guys that know, like the reason why you stop losing weight, at like, these calorie deficits eventually is because your body, you reach metabolic adaptation because your weight's changing and there's all these other factors. But like same thing, we can take that same concept and, use it to our advantage where it's actually benefiting us with a reverse diet. And so, just recognize like there's stages to your journey. Like I feel like a lot of people, like when they're in a calorie deficit or they've been in one for an extended period of time, or they have like this idea, they're like, oh, like I don't want to be hungry all the time for the rest of my drink. One, you don't have to be super hungry because we got satiating foods. There's some more.
There's a lot of tricks. There's a lot of tips and tricks out there for that.
Yeah.
So,
but then on top of that, like, you know, there's also that like light at the end of the tunnel kind of moment for people. Like when you get to your goal, like when you get to your goal weight, when you get to your like kind of goal body composition, where you're like, sweet, like I feel good here. I like this. This is awesome. Like, you know, you can reverse diet and then have a way higher maintenance calorie amount that you could be eating on a daily basis than you otherwise would have. And it's like that,
right.
Because people are like, oh, like I don't want to have to like, you know, starve for the rest of my life. It's like you don't have to. Like there's definitely that like, and we're getting like, I feel like we got a really nice taste of that for you. Like this last diet, it's like, oh, okay, I'm like 75 or I'm like 70 pounds down. I'm eating like way more freaking food. This is like life is good. And now it's like, you know, we're just kind of like you said, you're going for kind of like a goal, like feel like a goal, like like I mean. We're not too far from getting to a place where, you know, we're going to be able to, you know, maintain and then it's just kind of like at that point, like what your next goals for yourself are, which, I mean, do you know what those are? We could talk about that a little bit.
I don't really know yet. So
gonna do some bodybuilding. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know.
I think the issue is time. Like
you're doing a shit ton of stuff. You've got, because you're doing the I can't remember the acronym for it. The palm.
Because Michigan is shaped like a hand, and we're riding across the palm. Across lower Michigan.
What?
Yeah.
That's why they called it that. That's crazy. That's funny. I was like, because I've heard of like people being like, oh, the mitten. It's like, where do you live on the mitten? And it's like, you know, wherever. But that's very clever. Cool. So, you know, as far as, you know, your journey goes, and as far as like, you know, the success that you feel like you've seen when it comes to, you know, like when it comes to this reverse diet, when it comes to, you know, staying consistent and like seeing that bigger picture for yourself, like, do you have any kind of like takeaways or any like golden nuggets or anything that like kind of like helped you get through, you know, some of those maybe like mental or like, you know, like maybe like mental obstacles like throughout it? Like what helped you kind of like stay like dialed in over this last like year?
I definitely had to remind myself to just like, I'd still weigh in because that's a good source of information. Yep. But I also reminded myself, you know, right now we're not looking to see the scale go down. If it does, that's great, but it's not the goal. Yep. So don't worry about the scale, worry about how your pants are fitting, how, you know, your tops and, you know, stuff like that. And then also thinking about how you can't grow muscle without still growing fat. Like, ultimately, like if you want to get more muscle, you can't be in a deficit. And I wanted more muscle. Yep. So, you know,
being in those building phases can really like, because especially after like someone's kind of like newbie gains are kind of done and over with a little bit, which we're getting to that point where like, you know, you're like, I would say getting towards that like advanced kind of like into that stage of your you know, strength training journey. And so like, you know, newbie gains, they're not going to come as quickly as they used to, which is fine. But like, but it's all the more reason to put your body like and give it these like breaks or these bulking phases or these reverse diets, basically, which eventually we'll see how things go once we get to like kind of like your true like place of maintenance where you're like, I feel like really good here. Like then it's like, okay, well maybe we'll do like a bulking phase to, you know, put on some more muscle. Because for those of you guys that don't know, like when your body's in a calorie deficit, it's not in a very good environment to build muscle. Like it's not, it's just like, it's hard. Like I said, unless you're like newbie gains doing shit, like at the very beginning, probably you're going to be losing more muscle than you're going to be putting on. That's just how it goes. But whenever we're, you know, bulking, when we're in a calorie surplus, like we'll eventually be, that's and like we were whenever you're doing your reverse diet, like, you know, our bodies are in a much better environment for putting on muscle and building that muscle. And yeah, you might build a little bit of fat along with it, but it's worth it in the long run. It's
not hard to get like,
no. Yeah.
Like you have the mindset that you're like, I can, and I will get rid of this. It's not that big of a deal. Like it doesn't stress you out as much, like versus before you started your journey. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and in the beginning of the journey when you're just like, I
Yeah.
not where I want to be at all, even close. So,
Well, because I was going to ask you, like, for you, what do you think helped you? Do you think it was just time, or like, because a lot of people have a really hard time, like anytime, because sometimes people, when they come into the journey, they have to, like, I'm like, hey, like, you've fucked your metabolism up, you've been starving yourself, you've crash dieted forever, we're going to have to do a reverse diet, and you're probably going to have to gain a little bit of weight before we can truly start to lose some weight. People do not like hearing that. Like, that just is like, that is like, that just like is like a gut punch to them, and then sometimes they listen, and then they get the results, and then sometimes they don't, and they're still doing the same shit they were doing and not getting progress. And that sucks, but hey, like, it is what it is. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. But for you though, for those that, are like, okay, like, I think I'm ready. Like, I've psyched myself up. Like, I'm ready to do either a maintenance phase or a reverse diet or whatever it may be. Like, what helped you, like, detach, like, from the number on the scale, like, during that period of time? Like what helped you, like, not care as much about the number while we were kind of like coming in? Was it just like setting the expectation for yourself, or was it just like
it was setting the expectation, but it's also knowing where, like, BMI comes from, and how that's just bullshit. So, like, just having all of that extra knowledge, knowing that in order to grow the muscle, I have to put on a little bit of weight, and that's okay. It was just like every little bit that I've learned or had learned up until the reverse diet started, and still learning, but it all poured into my mindset, and knowing, like, I'm getting advice from people who are where I want to be versus, like, the random advice from people who don't lift weights at all.
Oh, for sure. No, I like that last point too. Like, because I feel like having somebody who's done it before and has like you said, like, they're where you kind of want to be, like, having that reassurance. It's like, okay, like, I'm not fucking up. Like, we're good. Like, this is supposed to happen. This is the way it's supposed to be. Like, I think having that reassurance, like, can be helpful, because, like, I mean, we all get in our head sometimes. Like, sometimes, like, the scale is like, you're like, oh, God, I don't want to see the scale go up. Like, I don't want to see this happen. Like, nobody wants, if your goal is weight loss, nobody wants to see the scale go up. But in those moments when it's happening, and like you said, having that understanding, that background knowledge, but then also having the reassurance, like, that, hey, like, we're right on path. Like, like, this is exactly, what's supposed to happen. Like, having that, I think it can help us get out of our head on those days when we're just like, maybe not feeling it as much as we otherwise would.
Yeah.
Cool. Sweet. Well, other than that, anything else that you want to mention to the listeners before we hop off here? Anything else? Any like, I guess for you, like, between like this last year and next year, like, where do you want to be like a year from now? What do you see your next year being? I know we didn't even talk about this. I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, you're putting me really on the spot. I'm not really sure. I kind of want to see where I'm gonna go. Like, I feel like the possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have more, like, a bigger picture of what possibilities there are out there now, versus, like, last year. I know, like, a lot of the stuff at the beginning, like, where I am now, I couldn't even imagine last year, so I'm just like, all right, well, let's see where this goes. And
that's a good feeling. That's a good place to be. Like,
it is.
Just be like, damn, like, I crushed it this last year. Like, and now it's just like, man, like, I know what I can already do in a year, and I know that I'm just getting better by the day. So, like, it's like this next year, it's just like, well, we'll just see what freaking happens. So cool. Sweet. Awesome. Other than that, where can they find you on social media?
On Facebook as Erin Towsley. I'm on Instagram and TikTok as Erin Towsley Fitness. So yeah, that's it, I think.
Sweet. Awesome. Cool. Thanks for coming on here, you badass. Thanks for coming on here. Appreciate you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yep. All righty, guys. On that note, I hope that you guys got value from this. I hope this gave you a little bit of an insight into kind of like the mindset shifts and what your journey can look like eventually whenever you build build that muscle. You put the reps in without counting them. You go and do the work and, do it right and do it the right way. And, just having like a support system along the way definitely doesn't hurt. So other than that, guys, yeah, let's freaking go. I'll talk to you later. Bye.